following program is brought to you by the Ed Snider Center for Enterprise and Markets at University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business. Welcome to the Ink Tank. Stay with us to get the inside scoop about technologies that could disrupt and challenge the way you do business.
Hello, I'm Christina Elson, and on this edition of the Ink Tank, we'll be discussing the role of government in safeguarding financial transactions from breaches and terrorist acts. We'll also be exploring the role of educators in ensuring that all students have the opportunity to be at the forefront of changing business practices. Talking with me today is Yaya Fanusie. He's a director of analysis at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and an adjunct professor at Morgan State University. Yaya, thanks so much for being here today with me in the Ink Tank.
Thank you, Christina. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So let me start a little bit going back in time. Now, you were 7 years with the CIA as an analyst. You were looking at counterterrorism issues, and you've been in policy. So help us understand a little bit when you first started to see some of these practices that we're talking about today emerging as a concern for the community, the policy community, and the counterterrorism community.
Well, I'll have to go back to just the nature of my work. I've, for years, like you referenced me working for the CIA, I was always an analyst, but also an investigator, someone who was trying to uncover things, right? And so I left government and found myself at the FDD, we call it, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, tasked with working with our center to look at illicit actors. So basically criminals, terrorists, folks who are doing illicit activity and what means they're using to advance those goals. And in 2015, I started working at the center, and a few people would mention Bitcoin. Because I was looking at illicit finance, and people said, oh, well, Bitcoin is something that, cyber criminals are using and hackers. And people talked about terrorists using Bitcoin. And there were a few reports about ISIS using Bitcoin. And back in 2015, I was new to this whole world of fintech. I knew nothing about cryptocurrencies. But the researcher in me said, okay, terrorists are using Bitcoin. Let me figure out what they're doing. Let me track them. Let me investigate. And it was always very difficult to substantiate these claims of ISIS using Bitcoin. People would say it, but then when I would try to find the sourcing, corroborate it as an outside open source researcher, I couldn't find out. I couldn't verify it. But it was sort of stood in the back of my mind that this was a potential concern. And about almost a year later, in 2016, I saw a press report, an obscure press report coming out of the Middle East, and it said that there was a terrorist organization that was based in the Middle East that was raising funds through Bitcoin. And when I first saw it, I said, yeah, okay, this sounds like another one of those press stories. Maybe it's hearsay. Let's look into it. And I decided to look into it. I actually had a bunch of interns, or a few interns. I wish I had a bunch. And I said, let's check out this press report. Let's see if this group is actually raising Bitcoin. Let's see what we can find out. The group was on Twitter. They had a Twitter account. They had infographics, and they saw something I had never seen before. They were soliciting funds, and in their graphic, they actually had a QR code. And the QR code, once you scanned it, and we could do this, it went directly to blockchain.info, which is a site that linked to the Bitcoin address with that QR code, and we could actually see what was in the address, or like an account. So that was the first time that I ever had the opportunity to look at something. It was a verified terrorist group, a media outlet, and we were actually able to look at the transactions, study them, see how much they had raised. And that was the beginning of me looking at blockchain technology and how illicit actors could use it. Doesn't mean that that's the only way it's going to be used, but that was the beginning.
Yeah, so that's fascinating because the technology, even a couple years ago, it's moving so fast now. And there's so many new applications for it and so many people looking at ways to modify it to make it more useful for every industry, including the nefarious ones that we're going to be talking about. So what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about or that you're seeing even a couple of years on in terms of how it's progressing, how it's being used more and more?
Yeah, well, so the first thing is that criminals are often early adopters of technology, right? So one thing I'll say is when you think about particularly terrorists, right now, it's not that terrorists, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, it's not like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are their go-to technology. What we're seeing is experimentation. We're seeing campaigns here and there that we discover where they're actually trying things out. They're putting up a Bitcoin address, and then if they don't get a lot of funding, then they're trying to tell their followers how to find Bitcoin. They're trying to teach people. Then they're branching out into different types of coins, different coins besides Bitcoin. So there's an experimentation going on. The key there is that if terrorists are going to sort of be at the front, ahead of the curve and on the front lines of innovation, those of us who are trying to stop terrorist funding, stop these actors from, their plotting and getting resources, we sort of have to be as smart, if not smarter than them. So one of the key messages for government is, okay, don't sleep on this technology, right? Like you should, the folks that you're hiring, many of whom don't know much about blockchain technology, like people are going to have to learn this. We're going to have to hire people who understand it. And that's just on the terrorist spectrum. If we think about state actors who are getting very aggressive with understanding blockchain technology, investing in it, building blockchain systems, because they, many of them want to evade sanctions or find workarounds. That's another issue.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that because there's been some great news in that area recently. I'd love to get your perspective on what you've been seeing. First we saw Venezuela going for the cryptocurrency fundraising scheme.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing news that Iran is thinking about doing the same thing. You yourself have written about this. And behind it all seems to be Russia. So what is going on with this space? Is this, are these entrepreneurs or, this gets very complicated very quickly, but help us understand something about this.
Well, a good way to think about it is really the history of what happened with Russia. Russia is a very interesting case study because in, maybe 2014, when Bitcoin was getting big in Russia, people were talking about Bitcoin. The Russian government was very much against Bitcoin. There were actually there was legislation that was being drafted to ban Bitcoin and to ban cryptocurrency businesses, right? That was the thing in Russia within the government.
Yeah. We
noticed, though, in about 2015, 2016, there started to be some different voices within the government saying, okay, well, let's not necessarily ban Bitcoin. And you know what? This technology could be very useful because many Russian banks are sanctioned by the U.S. and the EU for Crimea and some other things. And so because Russian banks are under sanctions, it makes it difficult for them to receive capital and for them to transact as they would if there weren't sanctions. So we actually started to hear Russian officials say, we should use this blockchain technology so that we could evade sanctions. So that basically what they're saying is so that we can start transacting with the world in a way where we're unencumbered by sanctions restrictions. And Russia took the first step, I think, to start investing in blockchain technology. They're doing a lot of pilot programs, and it's not just within the banks. They're, other parts of their government are looking at integrating blockchain technology. And in essence, technology is good. Innovation is good. I mean, we're seeing this around the world, right? Everyone is looking into blockchain technology. Not a bad thing at all. But what is interesting is that Russia is trying to work with others, I'd say, let me back up. If I say, think about Facebook. If Facebook is the biggest social media company, and if I say, you know what, I want to create my own social network. I don't like Facebook, so I'm going to create my own Yaya Facebook. I can do that. It's very easy, but it's not going to be anything unless I get other people to join it, right? Other people to join the network for it to really work. And it's similar with blockchain technology. A country can say, I want to create a blockchain technology so that my banks can do business. But if you're not going to have other countries that sort of opt in, it's not going to work. And we think that's what Russia is doing. Russia is trying to build, but also trying to encourage Venezuela to get on the cryptocurrency bandwagon. And now we're seeing strong moves with Russia meeting with Iran, and now Iran making the same announcement. And that's sort of that's what we're seeing. We're seeing on the horizon state actors who don't like sanctions deciding that they're going to work together to try to create an alternative financial system with blockchain technology as at the root of it.
So when it comes to dealing with these kind of authoritarian regimes, what are the tools that we have at our disposal? Because, technology is something that Americans love progress. They love freedom. They see technology as something that helps create well-being and prosperity for lots of people. So there's sort of, I think, as you said, an inherent disconnect between sort of libertarian values and the use of technology for these sort of authoritarian and other kinds of ends. So what can we do to counter that, to help counter that and keep these technologies associated with free, liberal democracies more so than the alternatives?
Well, I think the first part is realizing that there's a race going on. I don't know if this term will stick, but in one article I said it's the crypto race, akin to the space race, right? In space race, it was Russia, the United States, trying to get to the moon and try to advance technologically with space. And I think something similar is happening, except in this race, Russia knows it's in the race, and I don't think America realizes that there's a
we don't know we're in the race yet.
We don't know we're in the race.
Right.
So that's the issue. So see, this technology, blockchain technology, there's a beauty in the fact that this technology, like the internet, it's part of the internet, which has grown because of open source software, open source platforms, and that's not something that you could or necessarily should want to stop, right? Innovation with open source platforms. That's the beauty of this technology, that it's opening up so much, and so it's reaching so many different people and so many new business models. So the approach can't necessarily be, how do we stop them from innovating? I think the approach is more, okay, so if we see that this development is happening, how can we make sure that we're involved, we meaning sort of the U.S., how can we make sure that we are involved in its development, in the business models that it creates? Because whoever sort of gets out in front and develops these global, new global networks for transferring value, outside of the regular banking system, whoever gets involved in that and builds that is going to have an advantage.
Right.
And so if we're concerned that, let's say, an actor like Russia or even China in some ways and Iran, which don't have the same respect for liberty and human rights, if we want to make sure that this technology is used for good, then we should compete to make it good from our standpoint.
So thinking a little bit about then what we can do to help make sure that we're at the forefront of bringing these technologies into the world for good, let's say. What are some of the tools that we have at our disposal to do that? So, and also let's talk a little bit about the business community, because the business community clearly has a role in this. So when we see companies that are entrepreneurial or entrepreneurs even in the U.S. who are looking for opportunities to be in these emerging technology spaces, how should we, make sure that they're helping them understand how to do the right thing, let's say? Yeah.
So I think part of it is we have to bridge this gap between the tech space and the financial space. Now, everyone, when they think of how blockchain technology is doing so much, they think about, that's fintech, that's the financial sector. And the thing that I'd point out is actually most of the real development here is not happening in finance, it's happening in tech. And there's this gap. because the financial world knows all about anti-money laundering. They're up to their earballs in what we call AML, anti-money laundering, and all that stuff, counter-terrorist financing. That's a part of the business in the financial world. The tech world is new to finance, really. And so they are building and developing at a breakneck pace, and not necessarily thinking about, how does this relate to terrorist finance and all these other things, right? And I think we have to bring the two together so that folks that are in tech sort of learn from the financial community, which kind of understands these issues. Now, a lot of people might say, well, but the financial community is behind, right? And tech is just so forward. They just break things and move fast and ask questions later. But with finance, anything dealing with money, that's the thing. It's a little bit different. It's because of the stakes, because we're talking money, and money funds all types of things, and money can be used for a lot of different aims. We have to really make sure that we're at least asking the questions, these sorts of questions.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm all for continuous improvement and, making sure that you're moving fast and not getting held up by over-regulation. At the same time, we do have to really think about making sure that people aren't putting themselves and others into situations where they're, just really going to contribute to something that's very detrimental to the whole business and tech community, right?
Yeah. And you made me think of another thing too, which is there's also that issue of you don't need a blockchain for everything, right? Because that kind of, I was. There's so many examples, though, of people sort of getting on the blockchain, not bandwagon, but being like, I'm very curious about blockchain. I actually say there's sort of this arc of blockchain familiarity, which is first is, what's blockchain? Like, I've never heard of it before. Then it's like, ooh, this blockchain is interesting, right? You start learning more. Then as sort of time goes by, you start reading more. You're like, wow, this is very intriguing. Blockchain can do everything. Everyone needs a blockchain. You get a blockchain. You get a blockchain. Everyone gets a blockchain, and blockchain is going to save the world. And what I discovered, because I went through this, which is why I'm able to say this, then as you sort of learn the technology, you realize that so much of it is, they're pilot programs, they're press releases that aren't really news, it's just a press release. And you realize that there are a lot of limitations still, there's a lot of experimentation, and there's a maturing that happens. And I think we have to also bring that to this space where we've got to really make sure that people understand you should have criteria for embarking on a blockchain project. Don't just do it because it's blockchain. That there's actually a lot of times where it will be more expensive and more cumbersome to embark on a blockchain approach.
Yeah, and certainly, even for investors, making sure that you're not just throwing bad money after bad money after a bad business idea, right? Yeah.
Following the hype.
So that gets us to talking a little bit about, you've touched on even seeing that this overlap between fintech and technology, finance, really understanding how those two need to mesh together is probably creating a lot of new opportunities for people to develop their skills and to think about what kind of work career they can have. So let's talk a little bit about that. You yourself, you said that you didn't come out of school with a blockchain degree, and you've learned a lot of this on the job. But what kind of skills do you think you yourself wanted to have as you started into the space that you're in, and what are some of the things that you developed along the way?
So the number one skill, this will sound maybe cheesy, but the number one skill to sort of get smart in this space is curiosity. There's no one class. I know there are classes on blockchain, right? But there's no one class, there's no one book, there's no one. What I found when I knew nothing about Bitcoin or blockchain and I started to investigate it, I found that what was most useful was the informal ways of education. One of those is podcasts. Honestly.
Good.
I mean, it's a softball for you there. No, I'm so serious because in an environment where again, especially in like 2016, when I really started looking at this, there weren't a lot of, you could find articles here and there. And there are some online courses, but even those, they don't give you the full picture. And I found when I would maybe read an interesting, like a blog or Medium article by someone, I would go and put their name in a podcast app and then listen to them talk for an hour or 45 minutes about what they're doing in the blockchain space. And they would mention other companies. And then really, there's this library of just always being this growing library of people on podcasts who are experts, because podcasting that's the way of the future, right? For technology and new businesses. So that led me to find out who should I follow? Who should I follow on Twitter? Twitter is a great place. It would point me to the developers, the people in the space, the new companies that are really building. That's really the crypto blockchain space is a living, very organic space. So you sort of have to kind of not be in it in terms of being a developer or coder, but you kind of have to be sort of in the midst of the people who are doing it, whether that's listening to them, following them, consuming them. You're not going to get it from government sources or academia, although academia is now sort of catching up.
So that brings us to the role of academia.
Yeah.
So what should academia be doing? Because, I saw a fast article a few months ago, I think it was in the New York Times, and, it's talking about this idea that colleges and universities are seeing that students are just hungry for this, just as you're saying. And they're trying very hard to think about how they can help them understand this landscape.
Yeah.
So, but, it's tough. It changes a lot. And academia is often not the most rapidly changing place. So what are some things that you think could be doing, academia could be doing better, perhaps?
So there are a few steps. Interestingly, the first step starts with academia engaging outside of academia, right? Because a lot of, even in the computer science departments, many of them are not really into cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, or it's new to them, or they just, they're very new to it. So the first step is having people either in industry or who know the technology engage the departments, the computer science departments, the business school departments. And that's one of the things that I found to be helpful. If you can actually I've had conversations with folks in higher ed who I brought up blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and they responded with, what is that? And so we had to have a conversation about, well, this is what blockchain is. And this is, and I remember having this conversation last year before the price rise of cryptocurrencies. And they were like, oh, this is interesting, blockchain. And then as the months went by, then the price started going up and they're hearing it all around them.
Yeah.
So one, getting people on campus, guest lectures. The thing is, you're right. The students they're on it. Most campuses now have some sort of blockchain club, cryptocurrency club, and that's good. That's going to happen. That's going to develop. But I think for academia to fulfill its mandate, academia should go through a more structured process of finding how to integrate blockchain technology into the curriculum. Now, it doesn't mean you may or may not have a blockchain class, but maybe you can have components where you look at blockchain technology within the sciences, within the computer sciences, the hard sciences, and within business, which is sort of the route that I've tried to tap into. Because business is all about entrepreneurship is a big part of it. This is developing. Business schools should find ways to integrate, whether it's a guest lectures, seminars, and the like. Just getting exposed is the first step.
Yeah, I mean, for me, business schools have a real role to play in helping people understand what the world of tomorrow is going to look like, and that's a very interdisciplinary approach. And so business schools should, in my view, be thinking very seriously about that. But so you reached out to Morgan State University and you've been teaching there. Tell me about that. What are you doing? What are your goals? And you're a busy guy, so to sort of go and start teaching classes, in a university setting. What is your motivation? What are you hoping for there?
I am hoping that others do better than I did. So I graduated. I went to, I'm from California. I went to UC Berkeley in the 90s. So I graduated in 1997, and looking back now, I realize that I was right next to the center of technological innovation and the epicenter that brought about all of the, the business models that we deal with now, the Facebooks, that all came from the 90s innovation. And I realized looking back that I was totally oblivious to it. I was an economics major. I wasn't into technology per se, but now I'm thinking back and I'm like, I probably should have understood this technological wave. I would have been more prepared for all these changes. And as someone who was really, my focus in undergrad was economic development, and I did a thesis on economic development in the inner city of the U.S. compared to rural Zimbabwe. It's a whole other story. But I was really concerned about this issue of economic development. And I thought about, wow, so much wealth was created from the internet, this wave of the internet. And I totally missed it. And a lot of my friends, a lot of folks who I think were focused on economic development issues, particularly community development. I was really focused on empowering the African American community with economics. And I totally missed it. I missed it. And I thought, as I started to learn about blockchain technology, yes, at first it was looking at the illicit side of it for my work. But then as I actually started to see, wow, I actually see new business models opening up. I'm not a blockchain hype person, but I'll admit that there's some revolutionary technology here that is enabling some new processes, right? Some new ways of doing business. And it really seems that this mode of technology is going to be very important for future business. With that, I said to myself, how can I ensure that students like me, now 20 years later, don't miss out on this technological wave? And I reached out to a friend at Morgan State University, which is an HBCU, historically black college university. And I said what I told you before. I was like, would Morgan be interested in bringing awareness of this technology to the students? And my friend was like, what is blockchain technology? What is that?
Sure.
And that started a series of conversations. And to your question, what do I want to accomplish? So I'm teaching a course. It's an elective course on blockchain app development. And the aim is to provide an interdisciplinary approach where students who many do not have strong programming knowledge, for them to understand the key concepts of blockchain technology, what blockchain technology is, but even more than that, to understand what it enables, right? Because it's, the nuts and bolts of how it works, you do have to understand the basics, but then to really, if you're not a computer science, what you really need to understand is, okay, well, what might this allow me to do or allow businesses to do? So we're teaching that. And then the final, I guess, outcome is we want students to create and define solutions. We want them to create solutions, and we're actually helping the students look at problems that they're seeing and propose ways to come up with a blockchain solution to some either problem or a business idea. So that they'll be familiar with it. They're not going to become some of them may become coders because we'll provide some mentorship for them. But most of them are going to go off. They're going to do something outside of computer science. But we want them to be prepared to understand this technology and then how it could be applied.
Yeah, and that's so important because even going to work for another firm, the difficulty of bringing in a technology and really understanding how to use it internally to help that firm be successful and innovative and continue to improve. There's so much that has to change from within. And so you really do need people that can embrace this on all levels and then really be able to communicate what benefits they can bring, whether you're starting your business or doing that for someone else, you know? So yeah, that's fantastic. So what else do you see in terms of skills that you would like to see young people in school pursuing? What kind of landscape do you see for them as they're coming out into the work world?
So, the answer is different based on students' inclinations. To me, it's glaringly obvious that coding skills are going to be very important for the future, for future students, for future business. I'm very, I'm not a coder myself, but I can see that students going into programming will likely have a bright future, particularly because some of these new platforms. So, for example, you take a blockchain like the Ethereum blockchain, right? That's this blockchain built on smart contracts, and the smart contracts are built in this language called Solidity. And there's a dearth of Solidity programmers. So if you learn Solidity and you're an undergrad, if you're or in high school, if you learn Solidity, you will likely, at least in the short term, really find a job easily because of all the development that's happening in that language. So there's definitely a encouragement to pursue coding, computer science, programming is very important. But that's not going to be everyone. Everyone's not going to go into computer science. So I think the key thing is something that's not so developed, but people should start to think about, which is crypto economics or token economics in different terms.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Which,
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, the idea, now we have it's not a new economics, but what we have is this technology enables new ways of incentivizing processes, new ways to monetize things which couldn't be monetized. I was actually talking to an economist just a few days ago, and he was talking about this idea of, let's take a young athlete who, whether it's, let's take football, for example, who's a star football player and you want to support that player. What if there would be a way where, because you have blockchain technology, you could actually invest and support someone's schooling or education or whatever they're going to do through a smart contract where you invest in them and you could get a percentage of future earnings if you wanted to write a contract like that. Now, that might seem sort of unusual, but imagine how that could open up investment into young people and into talented people in a way that you couldn't before. What undergirds that is this idea of using a token to incentivize new processes and new behavior. So crypto economics, I don't know if that term is going to last, but this idea of looking at cryptocurrency incentives is going to be important for future business, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's just very insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I do think that, right now we're seeing a lot of games, but to think about moving beyond crypto kitties into actually, helping artists, athletes, art, whoever, musicians sort of think about how to navigate, and have a bright, successful future. I mean, that's really cool. So, yeah. So, okay. So here's a question for you. I like to ask all my guests to fill in the blank. So,
okay.
Fill in the blank. Yeah. So, in 20 years, because of blockchain, the biggest change in my day-to-day life will be
that I will be able to fund and invest in my grandchildren from their early days, and I will be able to track that funding, and I will be very much aware of the resources that my grandkids have at their disposal, because this engagement with a blockchain, even if it's not something where everyone talks about blockchain, it's just going to enable more movement of funds. And I think more investment in people as individuals.
That's fantastic. I love it. That's something really to look forward to, not the Russian Skynet, right?
Or that too. We might need Terminator.
We don't want that. Okay. So, the end of bad actors. Okay. All right. Well, Yaya, thanks for talking to me today. It's been really great to have you here.
It's been great talking with you, Christina. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Here at the Ink Tank, we're passionate about educating students on how to thrive in the business world. We encourage them to seek out knowledge on innovative technologies like blockchain that will most certainly have a great effect on their daily lives. Thanks to Yaya Fanusie for talking with me today. Until next time, this is Christina Elson in the Ink Tank.
Subscribe to the Ink Tank on Spotify, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. A special thank you to the Kauffman Foundation for their support. From the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, thank you for joining us in the Ink Tank.